Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to the 62nd edition of Water Talk organized by the National Water Mission, Ministry of Jal Shakti, Government of India. This series is an initiative of the National Water Mission to enable meaningful discussions on various initiatives taken by individuals and organizations to spread awareness about water conservation and management in India. It is also an initiative to encourage people to come forward to talk about water conservation initiatives and also in order to contribute their bit to make India a water secure nation. Before we begin with today's session, let us first watch a short video highlighting the role of National Water Mission in India's water conservation journey.
जलम जल स्थान गतिम सर्वथा एवं रक्षणीयम जंतु नाम सुख जीवनम हेतु जलस्य रक्षणम नूनम भवतु। जल ईश्वर स्वरूप है, सौम्य, शालीन, जीवनदायक। प्रकृति का दिया ये जल रूपी वरदान पृथ्वीवासियों के लिए सिर्फ एक विरासत नहीं बल्कि एक जिम्मेदारी है जिसे आने वाली पीढ़ी के लिए संभालना आवश्यक है और इस उद्देश्य की ओर पूरी निष्ठा से कार्य कर रहा है जल शक्ति मंत्रालय, भारत सरकार।
जल के बिना जीवन संभव नहीं। हमारी प्राचीन परंपरा में भी पानी के महत्व का वर्णन प्राप्त होता है। यजुर्वेद में कहा गया है, आपो हिष्ठा मोयो भवो, अर्थात इस धरती पर जीवन प्रदान करने वाला रस जल ही तो है। अनियोजित शहरीकरण ने तालाबों और झीलों जैसे जल संचय के परंपरागत तरीकों को लुप्त कर दिया है। हमारी आने वाली पीढ़ियों के लिए स्वस्थ और सुरक्षित जीवन के लिए करना जरूरी है।
जलवायु परिवर्तन के प्रभाव का विशेष ध्यान रखते हुए नेशनल एक्शन प्लान ऑन क्लाइमेट चेंज के तहत नेशनल वाटर मिशन की स्थापना की गई। राष्ट्रीय जल मिशन के प्रमुख उद्देश्य हैं जल का डेटाबेस सार्वजनिक रूप से प्रस्तुत रखना और जल संसाधनों पर जलवायु परिवर्तन के प्रभाव का आकलन करना, जल संरक्षण वृद्धि और संरक्षण के लिए नागरिक और राज्य कार्रवाई को बढ़ावा देना, शोषित क्षेत्रों सहित संवेदनशील क्षेत्रों पर ध्यान देना, 20% तक जल उपयोग कुशलता में वृद्धि करना और बेसिन स्तर के एकीकृत जल संसाधन प्रबंधन को बढ़ावा देना। जल संरक्षण हेतु 2019 में जल शक्ति अभियान की शुरुआत हुई।
जब किसी अभियान से जनता जुड़ी रहती है तो उसे कार्य की गंभीरता का पता चलता है, उसके सामर्थ्य का पता चलता है, उसके स्केल का पता चलता है, संसाधन कितने लगते हैं उसका पता चलता है। इससे जनता में एक सेंस ऑफ ओनरशिप आती है और जो सेंस ऑफ ओनरशिप जो है ना, वो सफलता की सबसे बड़ी कुंजी होती है।
2021-22 में जल शक्ति अभियान कैच द रेन नामक एक खास कैंपेन शुरू किया गया। जल उपलब्धता सुनिश्चित करने हेतु प्रत्येक वर्ष एक मुख्य प्रसंग का अनुपालन किया जाता है। 2023 का मुख्य प्रसंग रहा पीने के पानी के सतत स्रोत, जिसका उद्घाटन भारत की राष्ट्रपति महामहिम श्रीमती द्रौपदी मुर्मू द्वारा किया गया और 2024 में जल शक्ति से नारी शक्ति इस सिद्धांत को प्रबल किया गया। राष्ट्रीय जल मिशन का मोटो है रेस्पेक्ट वाटर फॉर लाइफ, जिसकी ओर बढ़ते हुए जल प्रयोग क्षमता बढ़ाने के लिए जल शक्ति मंत्रालय द्वारा पूर्णतः समर्पित प्रभाग भी शुरू किया गया है, ब्यूरो ऑफ वाटर यूज एफिशिएंसी। ये ब्यूरो कृषि, उद्योग और घरेलू क्षेत्रों में जल उपयोग दक्षता को बढ़ावा देता है, जिसके तहत विभिन्न हितधारकों से जुड़ना अनिवार्य है ताकि कार्यान्वयन हेतु मानक विकसित किए जाएं, जल लेखा परीक्षा को सुगम बनाया जाए, जल पद चिन्हों की पहचान हो, सामुदायिक जुड़ाव को सुविधाजनक बनाया जाए, अनुसंधान को प्रोत्साहित किया जाए, एवं राष्ट्रीय और अंतर्राष्ट्रीय स्तर पर वाटर यूज एफिशिएंसी में सर्वोत्तम प्रथाओं को प्रदर्शित किया जाए। राष्ट्रीय जल मिशन द्वारा एक महत्वपूर्ण पहल की गई है, राज्य विशिष्ट कार्य योजना यानी स्टेट स्पेसिफिक एक्शन प्लान, जिसका उद्देश्य है जल संरक्षण, अपव्यय को न्यूनतम करना और राज्यों के भीतर तथा उनके बीच जल के अधिक समान वितरण को सुनिश्चित करना। एकीकृत जल संसाधन विकास और प्रबंधन के माध्यम से जल सुरक्षा, स्थिरता और समता प्राप्त करना है। इसके तहत जल की उपलब्धता, उपयोग और विकास से जुड़े वर्तमान एवं पुराने आंकड़ों का गहन विश्लेषण किया जाता है एवं मौजूदा जल नीतियों, योजनाओं और सर्वोत्तम प्रथाओं की समीक्षा कर जलवायु परिवर्तन के प्रभाव को समझने और उससे निपटने के लिए रणनीतिक योजना बनाई जाती है। स्टेट स्पेसिफिक एक्शन प्लान तैयार करने के लिए राज्यों एवं केंद्र शासित प्रदेशों को राष्ट्रीय जल मिशन द्वारा वित्तीय सहायता भी प्रदान की जाती है। प्रमुख राज्यों को 50 लाख रुपए की धनराशि एवं छोटे राज्यों एवं केंद्र शासित प्रदेशों को 30 लाख रुपए की धनराशि अनुदान के रूप में उपलब्ध कराई जाती है। SSAP सूत्रीकरण के समन्वय और निगरानी के लिए राष्ट्रीय जल मिशन द्वारा 2 नोडल एजेंसीज को नियुक्त किया गया है। नॉर्थ ईस्टर्न रीजनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ वाटर एंड लैंड मैनेजमेंट, तेजपुर, असम, नेशनल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ हाइड्रोलॉजी, रुड़की, उत्तराखंड। इसके अलावा जल इतिहास नामक पोर्टल पर ट्रेडिशनल वाटर हेरिटेज स्ट्रक्चर्स की जानकारी सार्वजनिक रूप से प्रस्तुत की गई एवं जन भागीदारी को भी अत्यधिक प्रोत्साहित किया गया है। इसी कड़ी में एक विशेष पहल की गई है, जल संचय जन भागीदारी, जिसके अंतर्गत गांव का पानी गांव में और घर का पानी घर में इस उद्देश्य की ओर तीव्रता से कार्य हो रहा है। बोरवेल संरचनाओं पर विशेष ध्यान देते हुए आने वाले मॉनसून से पूर्व 10 लाख लो कॉस्ट आर्टिफिशियल रिचार्ज स्ट्रक्चर्स निर्मित करने का लक्ष्य निर्धारित किया गया है, जिसका उद्घाटन 6 सितंबर 2024 को सूरत, गुजरात से किया गया।
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री श्री नरेंद्र मोदी जी के दूरदर्शी नेतृत्व में 2019 में जल शक्ति मंत्रालय का गठन किया गया। प्रधानमंत्री जी ने जल को राष्ट्रीय प्राथमिकता बताते हुए जल संरक्षण को जन आंदोलन में बदलने की अपील की है। उनके मार्गदर्शन में जल शक्ति अभियान, कैच द रेन और जल संचय जन भागीदारी को जन आंदोलन में परिवर्तित करते हुए पूरे देश ने देखा है। अभूतपूर्व कार्यक्रम चलाए गए। इन प्रयासों से भूजल का स्तर बढ़ रहा है, जल संरक्षण को बल मिल रहा है और स्थानीय समुदायों को सामाजिक और आर्थिक लाभ प्राप्त हुए हैं। प्रधानमंत्री जी का सपना है कि भारत एक ऐसा जल समृद्ध राष्ट्र बने जहां जलवायु परिवर्तन के प्रभावों का डटकर सामना किया जाए और जल संरक्षण हर नागरिक का स्वभाव बन जाए। आइए माननीय प्रधानमंत्री जी के इस विजन को साकार करने में योगदान दें, संरक्षण को अपनी जिम्मेदारी बनाएं।
मंत्रालय के इतिहास में पहली बार राष्ट्रीय जल मिशन द्वारा भोपाल में प्रथम अखिल भारतीय राज्य मंत्रियों का सम्मेलन आयोजित किया गया और स्वयं माननीय प्रधानमंत्री महोदय ने इस द्विदिवसीय सम्मेलन को संबोधित कर इसका उद्घाटन किया।
Water security is critical for India to achieve our vision of Viksit Bharat. Water scarcity affects agriculture, industry and our daily lives, with the greatest impact on the poor and the vulnerable, women and children. Addressing this crisis requires a multi-pronged approach. Government, businesses and individuals all have to play their part. This is a collective responsibility. We need to be mindful of our water consumption, adopt water-saving practices like rainwater harvesting, and contribute to a sustainable water future.
जल शक्ति अभियान के अंतर्गत लाखों की तादाद में रेन वाटर हार्वेस्टिंग स्ट्रक्चर्स बनाए गए, अनेक जल निकायों का पुनर्विकास किया गया, विभिन्न जिलों में जल शक्ति केंद्र स्थापित किए गए, हजारों ट्रेनी प्रोग्राम्स और किसान मेले लगाए गए। वाटर बॉडीज की जियो टैगिंग और जीआईएस मैपिंग की गई और जिला स्तर पर साइंटिफिक डिस्ट्रिक्ट वाटर प्लान भी अपनाए गए। आइए हम भी जल शक्ति अभियान से जुड़े और जल आंदोलन को जन आंदोलन बनाकर जल संकल्प को दृढ़ करें, क्योंकि संरक्षित हो जल तभी बेहतर कल।
The video clearly highlights how community participation is the most significant factor if we need to make India a water secure nation. And everybody, including individuals, businesses, and organizations, need to come forward for it. It is now my privilege to welcome our special guest, Ms. Archana Verma, Mission Director of National Water Mission, Ministry of Jal Shakti. Thank you, ma'am, for being here with us for the session. It is also my pleasure to welcome Ms. Sujata Roy Abhijat, Associate Professor at the Department of Philosophy, University of Delhi. I would like to tell our audience that Dr. Abhijat brings with her deep expertise in the environmental ethics, feminist theory, and philosophy, and is also the principal investigator of an ICPR project. She has recently authored the book Environment and Religion, which adds to her remarkable contributions in the field. Thank you, ma'am, for being here with us for the 60-second water talk today. We are also joined by some of the university students today, and we will be hearing from ma'am, and then we have a quick Q&A session at the end. I request the audiences present to please type in your questions in the chat box, and after the session, we will bring you on the screen one by one to ask your questions. In today's session, Sujata ma'am will take us through the Indian philosophical traditions from the hymns of Vedas to the teachings of Buddhism and Jainism to explore how water has been understood not only as a divine force but also as a life sustaining element. As we heard in the video also, the Honorable President highlighted that Yajurved also talks about water as a divine and life promoting substance and a very vital source for the universe's function. Ma'am will help us rediscover how age old practices like celebrating rain, protecting rivers, harvesting rain, and living in balance with nature can guide us even today as we face modern water challenges. Very interesting topic and a very unique dimension. And before we begin with this enlightening session, I request Archana ma'am to share her thoughts on the importance of interdisciplinary dialogues in water governance and especially the importance of ethics and values when we talk about water. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Ananya, and a very warm welcome to my dear friend, Dr. Sujata Roy Abhijat, who I know since long. And it is a matter of chance that, we were conversing one day, and I realized that she is such a doyen in the field of ethics, and never before this session is especially very special because never before have we talked on water ethics. It's just the technical aspects of water or water, as a service that we have discussed, but never as water and the ethical dimensions of water. There's a very famous British poet, W.H. Auden, and he has said this famous quote that thousands have lived without love, not one without water. Water is the essence of life. And as Sujata will elaborate, what I can say is that no other civilization has understood that water is essence of life as much as our Indian civilization has. There was one talk in which Chandra Bhushan, who is right now Chief Secretary Andaman, and he was Mission Director Jal Jeevan. And he has also written a lot about the historical context of water. And he said that in the Vedas, it was always water which was referred to in the plural, never as a singular. Water was apas. And we have this whole god of water, Varun, who is so deified. All our rivers, be it Ganga, Yamuna, Kaveri, many of them are revered to as goddesses in our tradition. So today, when we stand at the threshold of, facing water scarcity in India, just for some statistics, we have only 1126 BCM of fresh water which is available. And if we are growing at the rate at which we are, by 2050, it is said that we will require 1180 billion cubic meter of water, while our freshwater reserve sources are only 1126 billion cubic meter. So where will we get this 56 billion cubic meter from if we keep on wasting water, if we keep on disrespecting water? And that is why the National Water Mission, one of its basic agenda is to bring back the respect for water. And with respect, ethics is a very core component in respect of water. If you respect water, you will not throw plastics in the river. You will not throw plastics in the drain. You will not throw plastics on the road, because all your plastics get into the river and chokes the flow of the river, pollutes the river. And ultimately, we are 70% water, so we consume that plastic. So such is our Indian tradition, that we have so much to learn from the reverence of water which our Indian tradition had. In the age old, not only Indian tradition, in say the Babylonian civilization and in other traditions, and in all the civilizations, if we see, be it the Nile or the Ganga or any other river, it was the course of the river around which the civilization centered. River's course was never changed to suit human beings. But now we are encroaching in her fields. We are not respecting the floodplain zones. And that is why we are facing, devastation. There is so much inundation of the floodplain zones of the rivers, because river is trying to reclaim her territory. And we as human beings are not understanding that it is the river who can survive without us, but we cannot survive without the river. We cannot survive without pure water. So, having said that, it is my proud privilege to again welcome Dr. Sujata Roy Abhijat, who is Associate Professor of Philosophy of Delhi University, and to discuss on this unique aspect of how to take forward water ethics. Because if we develop a perspective of ethics towards water, then I think it will go a long way in changing behavior, in changing our attitude to how we see water as not just a service or, something which comes from the pipe, but like we respect the temples, right? Like we respect the mosque, like we respect the Gurudwara, like we respect the churches, that same respect should be reclaimed by water. So Sujata, we look forward to listening from you on this very unique topic, which I thought was so fascinating that I had to request you to speak on this.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Over to you, Ananya.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And as ma'am rightly said that it's a very unique topic, and till now we have been talking about the technical and technological aspects of water conservation. But this is something that will be definitely enlightening for sure. Sujata ma'am, over to you for the presentation. We can have Sujata ma'am's presentation on screen now.
Okay, right. Thank you so much. A very good afternoon to everyone. I am indeed privileged to Ministry of Jal Shakti to have given me this opportunity, and to my very dear friend Archana, Mission Director, National Water Mission, to have called me for this talk. And yes, a very good afternoon to all of you, to my distinguished audience, to the students and dear friends. So I think very succinctly put, Archana has just described it, the director has just described that when we talk about water, it needs to be understood beyond that commodity. And how do we do that? We can only do that when we bring it into the realm of ethics. And it is here that the role of the environmental ethicist becomes very important or paramount. Because, yes, we have been trying to look into this problem of water crisis, climate change, sustainability, but probably so far the angle was from a very technological aspect. And as we environmentalists understand, there are no technological fixes for all the problems that faces us today, especially the environmental crisis. Because environment is not a mandate, it is not a commodity that we can treat it as an agenda and then try to resolve the problem. Hence, pitching forward for ethics, I would say it brings it into the realm of philosophy, talking about intrinsic value to the entire system. Why water? If we look into the Vedas, if you look into the Shrutis, the Smritis, the Vedic texts, the Puranas, and also the Bhagavad Gita, Mahabharata, Ramayana, water has always been a very central part. And before I start talking on water, I would slightly deviate that when we understand in the Indian tradition, water, of course, I can't see it in isolation, because in Atharva Ved also, it has been, the Paryavaran has been talked about. And how does one understand Paryavaran? It is a composition of 5 basic materials, Panch Mahabhuta as they call it. And you will see replete references to Paryavaran. So it was not that people were not thinking about it, not talking about it. But today, in the present times, somewhere we have gone wrong, thinking it is a rhetorical text which cannot be understood in the present times or in the present context of crisis. It is here that we'll try and understand that can there be a lucid understanding of what these Vedas talk, what about these traditions talk, what about the religions, the Indian religions, how do they bring the entire Paryavaran into the realm of ethical domain. So yes, when we understand water, we know that it is not just a physical substance, but it is sacred. It is a cosmic force that embodies not only material sustenance, but is at the same time talking about the spiritual purity. And when we talk about water, we should not mistake it to understand as an ontological entity, or we should not talk about preservation only from the perspective of ecological utility. Because we exist, we need water. No, we need to change this very basic thought. It is not just ecological utility, but also for the ethical and the metaphysical significance that water is very important. So building this framework, within this framework, I will try to put forward my point or position my point that water is an ethical concern in the very domain of Paryavaran, or Vrita, as it is mentioned in Atharva Ved. And when we try and understand water, let's not focus it merely for the sake of access or distribution. Let's not talk about it merely from the point of view of commodity or human survival. Let's just understand that it is a collective moral responsibility. And who could do it best? Of course, humans, with all the rationality that we are bestowed with. It is the humans who will take it forward. Can I have my slides now? Yeah. So before I go into the realm of the Indian philosophical traditions, what I'll be focusing on in this paper today, I'll briefly take you towards the Vedic traditions, mention the references that has been drawn about from some religious texts. Before I do this, we of course will talk about the Indian and the Western perspective. How did Vedic traditions or the Indian traditions understand water or the environment, and what was the understanding of the Western world? So, a very basic difference, a very alarming difference is that the Indian perspective viewed it as a holistic view of nature. The methodology here is holistic. When we try and understand environment, human also becomes a part of the entire paradigm. Whereas in the Western perspective, it is very anthropocentric. If we look into the literature, the common literature that is available for the Western perspective, it somewhere started around in 1970s. It is a very newly emerging branch, because it is in 1970s that we see that a lot of literature developed in the Western world with regard to environment. And one of the pioneer was Historic Root of Ecological Crisis by Lynn White Jr., where she says that the entire West is to be blamed for the environmental crisis. Why? Because the West understands this paradigm on the basis of a Judeo-Christian approach. Now, this Judeo-Christian approach is nothing but talking about Christian dualism. This Christian dualism is creating a divide, a schism between human and nature. And whenever there is a schism between human and nature, between mind and matter, between man and women, you got to understand that there has to be a hierarchy. And similarly, based on the Western understanding of environment, we created a dualistic understanding of the environment also. Whereas the Indian perspective in the Indian traditional system talked about reverence for nature. And how did they go about it? There are replete examples in the Vedic traditions, in Buddhism, in Jainism, which talks about nature being sacred, which talks about a spiritual connection, talks about integration, interconnectedness, and the religious ideas not only promote respect for all life forms, but also they take into cognizance the idea of human benefit. Whereas the Western perspective, nature was just a source. If you reflect upon some very important writings from the Psalms and the Genesis in Christianity, you'll be alarmed that there are certain lines in the Psalms and Genesis where it says man have dominion over everything that exists upon earth, thereby saying that the earth is a resource. Everything that flies, that crawleth, that swimmeth in the ocean. If you give man the dominion, this is where the perspective changes. Whereas in the Indian perspective, we understand that when we talk about environment, the concept of environment is integral to human identity. There is a relational aspect between humans and the environment, and they coexist. It is a symbiotic relation, they coexist, and this cannot happen without sustaining nature. Spiritual practices and ecological sustainability are intertwined in the Indian tradition. And here, when I talk about the Indian tradition, I would say that it also includes Buddhist, Jain, and also the other Indian religions which have emanated in this part of India, in the Sapt Sindhu region, as we understand in this geographical domain. Yeah, the next. So, there has been a diversity of intellectual traditions. Where does it draw its strength from? When we talk about Indian traditions, it draws its strength from Vedantic traditions, from the Buddhist traditions, from the Jain traditions. And here it talks about the idea of interconnectedness, non-violence, ahimsa towards all. And there are a lot of ancient texts which supports these ideas. So we can draw this philosophy by exploring into these religious texts. Whereas in the Western world, we see that when they talk about environment, it has emanated as a reaction. Reaction because in 1960s, the Western world was already perceiving that there was a lot of environmental crisis. And this crisis somewhere pushed them to think into the realm of environmentalism. So we see a very distinct parallel between how Indian tradition has gone about it and how the Western world is thinking about environment. Western world still thinks environment is a problem, outside us. It is a sphere outside the human existence. So this dualism, the mechanistic worldview, which was propelled further because of the technological advancement, because of the age of enlightenment, because of the scientific revolution, humans are endowed with the facilities that we have today. So this somewhere propelled that everything that exists on environment are mere tools for human use. And this dualism has contributed to the exploitation and to the degradation of the nature in the present world. Whereas in the Indian tradition, if you reflect back, you can see Rig Vedas 1500 to 600 BC. And as I mentioned, that these examples, these hymns and texts have already talked about environment and upkeep, and they draw its strength by making it sacred. They give it a sacred quality. Nature has always been revered as sacred. Rivers, mountains, forests, animals, plants, they are all talked from the perspective of biocentric behavior. They have life. Even the abiotic things like rivers, mountain, forest, they were given a sanctity. They were given a sanctity of life. Religious rituals which we practice in today's world seems to be revolving around these beliefs that we have. And as Archana ma'am just mentioned, that it cannot be carried forward if the knowledge systems does not support the culture, and if the culture is not supported by the local belief systems. It is the local belief systems which propels us to go back to the religious texts and try to understand how environment has been looked upon in the Indian tradition. Yeah, the next one. So ahimsa, as I mentioned, there is not only discussion of ahimsa and ecological ethics within the realm of Indian traditions, there are dharma shastras, which is talking about the dharma towards the environment. And here environment is understood as a concept which is embedded within our philosophy. There are ethical practices in Indian traditions which promote ecological responsibility. We call it, dharma towards the environment. You can call it ecological stewardship, urging humans to live in consonance with and in balance with the earth. Whereas in the Western world, we see that the crisis of 60s and 70s, of course, precipitated some action. There were people being drawn to this problem, and they themselves were trying to understand and address this problem by drawing some strength from the Eastern philosophies. You see, Arne Naes, when he talks about deep ecology, he has taken major inspirations from Vedic traditions, from the work of Buddhist philosophy, from Gandhi's philosophy, Swadeshi, Swadhyaya. He's taken a lot of inspirations from there. However, though they have taken inspiration, Ramchandra Guha critiques the Western environmental movements. He says deep ecology is too rooted in the Western understanding of dualism. It is trying to adopt the Eastern traditions, but it needs a further, deeper cultural shift. Whereas for an Indian tradition, we have always grown up with this idea of environmental embeddedness. There is an integration of spiritual as well as the ecological practices, daily rituals, spiritual beliefs, lifestyle choices, all promote environmental sustainability. In today's realm, we talk about 3 R's: reduce, reuse, recycle. But if you look back into the Indian traditions, it was always there. It is the same logic, the same traditions, which is being given a modern understanding or a modern jargon. Yes, the next. So, looking at this, now we try to understand that water is sacred. It is a cosmic force that embodies not only material sustenance, but it is also talking about the spiritual purity. Here, we are talking about water not from the perspective of utility, from the perspective of just preservation, but from the perspective of ethical and metaphysical significance. And when we start talking about water, we need to reflect upon our Vedic texts which dates back to 1500 to 600 BC, which teaches us about the non-dualistic nature of reality. It instills in us reverence for water, which is the foundation of all life forms. There can be no life forms without water. Vedas and Puranas have attached immense value to water, not just because it is sacred, not just because it is, sustaining life, but because it considers water as it is a cosmocentric approach where it is within the realm of the cosmos. Yeah, the next. Before we go on to talking about water, I will just try and explain how we understand creation of water. In Rig Ved, you see that the Hiranyagarbha, the idea of Hiranyagarbha, golden egg, it says is the source of the creation of the universe. The 129th hymn of the 10th mandala says, I quote, when there was nothing but bottomless, uninterrupted, timeless water, which in fact was egg shapes from which everything emanated. And you'll be surprised to know that this is compatible with the modern understanding of origin of the universe also, which says that there were single-celled bacteria and stromatolite colonies which flourished in the primitive oceans, giving rise to different forms of life. So this water is also being mentioned in Satapat Brahman, which belongs to Shukla Yajurved, and which identifies that water is the first creation. Few of the rishis understand that water produced fire, and from fire came up the other Mahabhutas. Sapta Sindhu, the concept of the sacred rivers, in fact, goes on ahead and gives it a maternal status and are central to the Indian ethic of water reverence, because it is, it is talking about in Atharva Ved, in Prithvi Sukta, there are hymns, there are lines which says, Mata Bhumi Putro Aham Prithviya, which means earth is my mother and I am her son. Goes on to say that whatever earth is what sustains us. It comes from the word Vasundhara, Vasudha, which sustains us, and water becomes a very equal and very strong component within the earth. So we have a lot of hymns which is talking about not only allegiance, not only filial responsibilities or familiar responsibilities of treating earth as a mother, but there are also hymns talking about upper. As director pointed out very clearly, it is called uppers and upper. And water here is treated as water purifying, and it has life-sustaining powers. We understand, when we understand it physically and in scientifically, that yes, it has life-sustaining powers, but it was all there in Vedas. Reflect back 1500 to 600 BCs, it was already being talked about. So Vedas emphasize not only about utility, but it talks about conservation. It also talks about the role of the human life. And Indian culture is replete with such examples. It talks about water being very central to life itself and places water usefulness and conservation of water as very central. There are a lot of texts which talk about it. Yeah, the next slide. Yeah, when we try and understand water, we need to understand that it has a dual nature. Dual nature because, it is not only present on the earth as terrestrial, but it is also celestial. Water stands as both testimony to terrestrial and celestial phenomena. It is a visible bridge between the earth and the heavens, embodying cycles of renewal, sustenance, and transcendence. When I say this, there is a line in Rig Vedic hymn which says, may the waters that are in the sky and those that flow on the earth, those whose channels have been dug deep and those that seek the ocean, all pre and purifying, may those divine waters protect me here on earth. This is Rig Ved 7.49.2, if I quote the citations. So we understand that it is present in the terrestrial form. It is also present in the celestial form. And we see in the terrestrial form, as you understand, it nourishes. It is in the form of a lake, ocean, river, different water bodies. And it journeys across the soil in the story of grounding. The water, there is a very important story of grounding here that we need to understand. There is a story of grounding, stability, and direct engagement with the physical realm, which we are all doing in the present context. However, in the celestial context, it is beyond the confines of the earth. How do we understand water in the celestial context? It is in the form of a rain, in the cosmic vapors, in the form of a cloud, and it finally descends upon from the sky to again nurture the earth, the bhumi, which we called it sacred and mother. So water here seems to be drawing a parallel between water and human existence. rooted in the earth, yet ever aspiring towards the infinite. Humans here are doing the same. It reminds humans that we are also in this rhythm of life. When we enjoy the terrestrial, we are also trying to seek the celestial gift. We are trying to understand and seek the non-duality. So here we understand how water mirrors not only its own journey, but also talks about the human existence, which is sort of mirroring the water journey. Yeah, the next. So I think the director has already talked about. She's taken few points away from me. The Vedas are replete with examples where we understand that there are water deities in Vedas. Say, for instance, Varun, the god of water, the ocean in Vedic age, he's considered to be a god of within water, and his vehicle is crocodile. See, when I say his vehicle is crocodile, let's not understand that it is just a vehicle. It sort of makes us understand the coexistence between water and an animal body. Apus, as mentioned, a water deity is invoked in 4 Rigvedic suttas. It talks about mother, water being mother, and sometimes even as a lord. Indra and Prajanya, water deities, are mentioned in the Vedas. Indra, who holds a weapon, is said to have created path for the water. If you go into the mythological stories, if you read the Vedas, it creates a path for the water, and Indra is also considered as the god of rain. In Atharvaved, which is a very important component because it also enshrines within itself the Prithvi Sukta, we find mention of Mitra and Varuna. And they say when Mitra and Varuna get together, water is formed. Are we to understand in the present context that it is hydrogen and oxygen? I really don't know. Okay, so Varun and Indra, they are hailed as gods of cosmic waters and rains, symbolizing divine control, symbolizing blessing. Okay, so we see that when we try and understand water and to give it this sanctity, to talk about it as sacred, we have enough examples which supports it. Yeah, the next one. Right. So apart from it drawing its references in the Vedas, we also see that there were, what we are talking today has been discussed in terms of rainwater conservation, in terms of water conservation and ethical practices. The ancient text, Krishi Parsar, and also known as Krishi Paddhati, discusses ancient agriculture systems. It talks about rainfall, it talks about measurement systems. It was all developed. The Brihat Samhita of Varavimira explains the importance of water and the hydrological utilities, the hydrological cycles. There is also a sacrifice which the kings would perform, which is called Karistvas, which is to bring rain. So rain has always been very important. Highest priority is given to conserving water because it irrigates the agricultural fields. Agriculture is very important. We saw how, there was a green revolution. India was suffering from famine post-independence. And how could it flourish? It could only flourish on account of irrigation. Why do we say Punjab fares better as compared to maybe some other states? Because it has a solid, robust canal system irrigating the lands. So Rig Veda states that water should be protected regardless of its form or location. It talks about the hydrological cycles, and it says water is never stationary, but it continuously evaporates. Talking about the dual and talking about the celestial and the terrestrial. Rig Veda also places great emphasis on water conservation and states that all types of water in the universe should be conserved. So we had these wisdoms, which are called ancient wisdoms in our traditions, talking about conservation also. Yes, the next slide. Apart from, yes, water being very relevant, very important for irrigation, for agriculture, because India primarily was a agricultural country. We draw our sustenance, one of the basic modes is agriculture. We also see that water has been talked about in the Vedas for its medicinal properties. Charaka Samhita, Sushruta, Samhita have all said that the water produced by the clouds, when it falls on the earth, it has no taste, no odor. However, it has healing properties. And when they say it has healing properties, it says it has all healing balms and herbs within itself. Is it talking about the mineral water that we consume today? Is it talking about the water laden with the kind of minerals that you actually consume if you can have for your sustenance and for your economic and for your physical well-being? So sun and air are described as the natural agents. And how do they play a very important role? They play a very important role in cleansing, in maintaining the sanctity and the purification of water. It also emphasizes upon the consumption needs, how it should be needed. Apart from this, of course, ritual practices in India, in the Vedic traditions, and later has been very, very significant. So there has been we have to talk about the sanskaras. Okay, so there are 16 sanskaras in total, and none of it can be indulged with or employed without use of water. Say, for instance, when we indulge in these sanskaras, there is this practice of achaman. There is the practice of tarpan. There is this concept of jaladan. And water seems to be very central even in the ritualistic performance that we do in our day-to-day practices when we do our pujas in our day-to-day activities. Yeah, the next one. So Vedic literature not only draws its sustenance by giving the citations as to where water has been talked about, we know that it is also talking about resource management. It is talking about water management. Water management from in a very different sense in what we do today. This water management is not on the idea of resource. It is not an external mandate. But here, water management is done on the idea of spiritual realm, within the framework of social and ecological responsibility. So, by understanding these ancient teachings, we can address the problems probably better. When we try and address from the ethical lens, probably we embrace the philosophy of water ethics, and it also ensures not only the present generation, but the future generation, which is the major mandate of sustainability. Yeah, the next. Before we go on further, it is just for the reads that there are different hymns, scriptures, which has talked about water. Of course, Nasadya Sukta being very, very important. Apart from Nasadya Sukta, there is Rig Ved Upper Sukta, there is Brihadangya Upanishad, and so many. I could only, enumerate a few of them. So these are just examples which are given in front of you. Yeah. So now briefly, I'll just touch upon, because we are talking about the Indian philosophical traditions, it would be incomplete due to paucity of time. It's not that the other Indian religions are not important, but I'm only looking into Buddhist and the Jain traditions, which came as an offshoot of this Vedic traditions. Yeah, you can tell me when the time is getting constrained. I'll try and put an end to it. Yeah, the next one. Yeah. So to understand this, because this entire dialogue, drawing from Vedas, drawing from other traditional texts, drawing from other traditional religions, we try to say that water draws its strength by being a virtue ethical concern. Water is a moral entity. And here again, I will try to emphasize that in the Western world, it was treated as instrumental for our use. Here we are saying that water in itself is a moral entity, and the traditional Indian thought have not treated water as mere resource, as a physical resource, but a sacred moral entity. Goal is that we move towards ecological stewardship grounded in virtues like care, restraint, and long-term thinking. When I talk about this, I will again take you, there are replete examples. There's a lot of contemporary work which is done by Anupam Mishra, who again talks about Rajasthan's indigenous systems of johads, baulis, and talabs, sarovars, pokhars, and they say they are talking about reinventing it, or they are talking about virtue of care and restraint, not because it is just for their survival, but not because it is legally enforced, but because it is internalized concept and the sanctity of water that is prima facie important to these societies. Another very important example, I'll take you to Assam. I think Archana will relate to it. We understand that all the water bodies in Assam is inundated with water hyacinth. It is very invasive species and it sort of chokes the water. What do we do? So, the traditional knowledge, the traditional wisdom, there were people who started producing exhibits. They started making small artifacts out of these very water hyacinth, taking care not only of the environmental responsibility, the environmental stewardship that I'm talking about, the dharmic responsibility, but at the same hand, trying to give ecocentric values to the entire environment, unlike the anthropocentric beliefs. Similarly, uh, when we now try and understand, we need to understand that a community based philosophy should be very, very important when we try and address this problem of water. And when we talk about a community based philosophy, the first thing that human needs to understand as a virtue is humility. Humility, not only with regard to each human being, but also before nature. We have just seen replete examples of cloud burst. Human, with all its supremacy, with all its technological advancement, really did not have an answer to the kind of the nature fury that we all experienced in past few months. And when we talk about this, we understand that modern science, modern engineering systems do not have a clear-cut answers. Why? Because they try to dominate water. Whereas traditional systems coexisted. They talked about ecological embeddedness. We need to understand that we don't need a top-down scheme, but we need a bottom-up. We need a bottom-up schemes which are driven within the realm or which are driven by ethical force. You'll see that there has been an echo of these theories in Gandhi's idea of trusteeship, when he says, Sarvodaya, when he talked about Abhyudaya, when he talked about trusteeship of every person. We talked about community participation. And this community participation stands in sharp contrast to the anthropocentric understanding of the West. It is with the ecocentric mandate that we move ahead when we talk about preservation of nature. And it is supported by our understanding of sacral quality. When we try and understand history, we know that history reminds us that the intellectual traditions and human lived experiences are mutually constitutive. It is history which makes us understand what is environment. And when we understand environment, it is this which reshapes our view. This has been also mentioned by the mission director herself in the brief note that she says. It reshapes our view, it reshapes our practices, our knowledge towards the environment. And this knowledge should emanate from the ethical domain, where we should understand that we are not separate from the environment. There should be an idea of interrelatedness, integration, cohesiveness, which is central to the formation of virtue ethics in the human paradigm. In this framework, we should understand that water is not a resource. It is not an infrastructure. It is not a scarcity only that we are trying to understand. It should be addressed from the moral and the spiritual frame. It should be an imperative, which is a moral and a spiritual imperative where, yes, we want to build a society. We want to build a society where everybody participates. It's a cohesive partnership of every living human being, which talks about virtues like simplicity, cooperation, mindfulness. And Indian philosophical traditions have helped us understand water as both sacred, life-sustaining, creating an ethical framework which is rooted in the understanding of the different R's. It is reverence, it is responsibility, it is reciprocity. It is not the present R's that we understand in the technological sense. It also talks about duty, which emanates from Dharma Shastras. These insights become very relevant when we try and see, or when we try and understand the sustainable use and the ecological balance. To sum up, a very important line from Rig Ved: waters are indeed life bestowing. May they sustain and protect us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Very interesting presentation, honestly. And thank you for highlighting the different ways in which water significance has been perceived in different spiritual texts, and how societies from the traditional times to till now have been engaging with water in different ways. And thanks a lot for such a unique take on water conservation. Uh, I would request Archana ma'am to please share her thoughts on Sujata ma'am's presentation, and then we can have the Q&A session briefly. Ma'am.
Ananya, can we first have the Q&A and then,
Sure.
I know I have
I
stepped
can
out.
Yes.
sum up?
I really stepped the time. I have gone
No,
about it in
No,
a very
that's
lengthy way.
okay. It was
yeah.
brilliant. It was really
Yes, ma'am.
brilliant.
Okay, so we have the
Okay.
students with us. They have some questions, so we can go one by one. We can start with Jayati, and then we can go as I see people on the screen. Jayati, your question, please.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. Am I audible?
Yes.
First of all, much thanks to the Ministry and, of course, Archana ma'am for conducting such a unique talk. And then Sujata ma'am for such an engaging presentation and also points that we usually bylook when we talk about ecological perspectives and environment. But while I agree to the point that she made that we do have a more embedded approach to environment, and then in India we have deep religious reverence for rivers like Ganga, Yamuna, and all. But we cannot deny also the fact that these certain rituals that we perform also end up polluting the river water bodies as such. And so other than their spiritual significance, rather their very own spiritual significance sort of hinders the ethical water use. So what are your views on that?
Yeah, I understand that in the present context, especially we all are sitting in Delhi, so we have seen how Yamuna is today. So there is a spiritual framework, but somewhere I agree that it fails to inspire us, to legitimize the pollution that we are creating. However, having said this, we need to understand that there has to be a spiritual re-education around this. And how would this happen? This would only happen when there is a reinterpretation. There is a regulation also that comes up, if there are these religious festivities which happen in and around rivers and waters, there has to be some regulation around it. Saying it is a religion does not absolve us of all the sins that we commit by defiling the water. So yes, it is sanctified in the religious text, but religious text, if we look, Dharma Shastra, Matsya Puran, I think I forgot to mention, Matsya Puran has in fact teachings and special preachings which says that you cannot contaminate water, you cannot pollute water, and there were special punishments given to people who were doing that. Artha Shastra talked about it. So what do we need to do in the present times? There has to be an ethical ritual guideline, somebody who can weave the two together, something which was already there in the Vedic text. We need to understand in the present context. When all this was being written in the Vedas and other Indian traditions, they of course could not envisage this kind of a problem. And once we do this, probably we'll be able to meet out the problem that stands. I also agree that there is a sort of a cognitive dissonance here, dissonance between what was taught and what we are practicing. This epistemological gap needs to be fulfilled. And all of us here are important stakeholders in our own rights. We as you as students, I as an environmental ethicist, if I can call, director madam in her capacity, government in her capacity, but let's not blame government or let it not be just a government mandate. Environment concerns all of us. So we need to understand that reverence automatically does not become care. Reverence needs to be reinvented in the present light. Spiritual significance in the present light through ecological lens will somewhere give us an answer. There has to be a balance drawn between respect and between the practices that we are doing. There has to be a balance between respect and restraint. Why not look for, eco-friendly measures? I mean, a lot of us are already doing. When you do Ganesh Chaturthi, a lot of people are already making idols out of, something which does not contaminate water. Why not reflect upon that? Why should something be sanctified just because it was in religion, or probably it was given in religion?
Gaurav, you can ask your question now.
Am I audible, ma'am?
Yeah.
Okay. First of all, I would like to, thanks, ma'am, for the lovely talk. Now, my question is that it is generally well accepted today, that we are very heavily dependent on technology. And, technology is sort of that one field which influences areas like agriculture and water management and whatnot. So, what is like the pragmatic way out of this? Like, do you think it's possible for us to go back to our traditional roots all the way? Or like, how should we address this? Should it be a fusion between, something traditional and something modern? How should we approach this whole thing?
I think, Gaurav, you already given me the answer, so that really helps me. That yes, there has to be a fusion. It has to be in the hybrid mode. I have eulogized. I have already talked about, the traditional systems being sustainable and being all good, but we also need to understand that it should be community driven. It should be. It should take into considerations the problems that we face today. Say it could be low on energy. It could be it could be supported by sustainable practices. We need to understand that when we talk about technology, but if it is left free without ethics, it is an unbridled horse. So technology supported with ethics, I would not suggest that let's go back to the primitive times, but taking help of technology with proper framework within the domain of ethics, I think would give us an answer. Yes, a hybrid mode which talks about community ethics, a hybrid mode which takes into account the traditional knowledge systems, the indigenous practices that was always prevalent. It should be complemented with the scientific models. And we need to understand that within the ethical compass, there has to be ecological grounding. It cannot talk in isolation. There has to be an amalgamation of the two. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Archana, ma'am, would you like to add something to this question?
I think she's mute.
Yeah, ma'am, you are muted.
I'm sorry, I'm in the middle of some important file work. Just go on. I'll submit in the
Okay.
end. I'm listening to it.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Vishnu, we can have your question now. Please ask your question. Yeah.
Am I audible? Thank you very much for this enlightening presentation. In your presentation, you mentioned of water hyacinths in Assam, and in many parts of India, especially in rural or tribal regions, we still see a deep sense of ecological stewardship when it comes to water. So from your perspective, how can these traditional balanced approaches influence our broader national water ethics?
Okay. So I think this is very interesting, because when I talked about water hyacinth, I also talked about the ecological stewardship that with which we move ahead. And this is a very common practice in India, right? Whether we examine the Johar, Bauli system of Rajasthan, or we talk about the sacred grooves enshrined within itself certain ponds, like, the I mean, of course, Golden Temple in Pushkar is not a sacred groove, but we have seen the relevance of water even within the religious domain, talking about reverence. So tribal communities have always engaged with water. There are a lot of festivals which happens in and around water: Magh Mela, Ganga Dashera, of course, Kumbh Mela. So when I talk about these traditional practices, I say that they should also be informed. Of course, they are participating. It is participatory, but it also needs to be an informed practice. Informed practice looking at the present problems that we all are facing. Right? How would that be? It would only be possible when there is a sharing of knowledge. Then, and apart from sharing of knowledge, it is supported with this idea of restraint and reciprocity. And we we need to make them understand in the present context, also them, somewhere even there they are going wrong, that water should not be treated as a commodity. It is scarce. And mission director has mentioned in the beginning, it is very scarce. And we need to see how traditional practices, along with sustainability, along with the ecocentric values, can move forward.
Thank you, ma'am. Saurav, just unmute and ask your question.
Yeah, am I
Yeah.
audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful presentation. Yeah, so my question, actually, you already mentioned it in your speech. You made this distinction between Western and Indian perspective on environment and nature. So you said at the heart of Western civilization there is this dualism. But when it comes to Indian tradition, it is a sort of unity in case of nature. So my question is are we to understand that this is a rigid philosophically, is it a rigid monism, or is it something like the ecofeminist like Wal Plumwood and all says it's a unity? Within that unity, there is actually a space for nature's independence, or not completely dependent on human, but nature has an independence at the same time. So that's my question.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's a very engaging question, because yes, we need to understand that when Western world was talking about it, it emphasized on the Cartesian dualism. It was talking about human nature. It was talking about human as subject and nature as object. The minute we do this, there is bound to be a hierarchy between the two. So Indian tradition, of course, it is monistic. But here, when I say monistic, it is the Brahman, which is Brahma, which is manifested in all things. It dissolves a radical dualism. Okay. Say you can reflect upon Sankhya's understanding of Purush, Prakriti. One is consciousness and one is inert. So though yes, it is monistic, it is monistic, but it is qualified monism. Okay, it talks about non-dualistic orientations. It is saying that it is not trying to erase the distinctions. It is trying to talk about unity in diversity. Bheda bheda. Though there are differences, but they are all together. So it is a shared ontological unity that we are talking about. And deep ecology, which was criticized by Ramchandra Guha because it is talking about sameness, it is, though it talks about diversity, it is also talking about sameness. Here in Indian thought, they celebrate or they emphasize difference within unity. It does not do away with individuals' independence and agency, which was a concern of ecofeminists, Val Plumwood and Karen Warren. So it does not do away with that kind of an individual agency. Yeah.
So Dakhya?
Yes, thank you so much, ma'am. So I would not take too much time. We live in a world where there is water scarcity, and whatever water we have remaining is also being contaminated. And after your presentation, do you think that we need to go back to our roots and study Vedas once from the beginning, maybe introduce them to the school at a very elementary level? Do you think that would help us sort of understand and respect water the way it should have been? And what are your views on that?
I think that's a very, very important point. Now that the mission director is here, I think we should implore upon her to make these changes in the HRD, and I'm sure she'll put on our word there, because when we try and understand environment, unfortunately the approach is very apologetic. Why do I say it is apologetic? There is a very good work done by John Hott, who mentions that there are three approaches to environment. He mentions one approach being apologetic, and I'm carrying forward the same view. Apologetic because somewhere when we are talking about environment, it is introduced to us at such a later stage in life. in college, higher education, in PhD. These students are like doing PhD, and now they're talking about environmental ethics. Why not talk about Paryavaran, which was mentioned even in Vedas from the very beginning? Why can't it be introduced at the elementary level from the schools? Because we see that these small kids are ambassadors in their own making. Say, for instance, do not burn patakas, fireworks during Diwali. They make a huge dent when they implore upon the parents that they cannot go and buy crackers from the market. So yes, when we talk about environment, we need to understand that, of course, reverence and all is very good. But when should it be talked about? It should be talked from the very basic level, initial level. And here, not only environment plays a very important role, but philosophy should also be inserted. I'm pitching in for that. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. We have a couple of more questions from people who have not joined here and they're not able to join because of some network issues. There's a question from Avantika Kalita. She's asking if water is considered a sacred element in Indian philosophy, does its exploitation and pollution amount to a moral failure rather than just an ecological crisis?
So yes, when this question is important because both we need to understand that it is not just ecological crisis. It has to be addressed within the realm of moral and spiritual imperative also. That when we try and address this, it should be talked about within the moral domain. And I said, when I was talking about the virtue ethics, that who is to cultivate these virtues? It's human. And the first thing that the human should learn is humility and cooperation. And within this domain, if you try and understand or address these issues, I think we have an answer to it. Yeah, it is the virtue ethics within humans, which is in isolation. Every individual self can practice it. We definitely don't need to a government to teach us. These virtue ethics are personal to us, right? Say, ma'am was talking about plastic choking the river front. Why can't we all stop using it? Why can't we carry the same old jhola, which our ancestors used to call it? We used to carry it when they were going to the traditional heart system. It is now not fashionable. We go and buy polythene, which are non-degradable. So yes, we have the answer is within us. And these imperatives comes within the domain of moral and spiritual imperatives. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. In the interest of time, we will not take any more questions. Archana ma'am, over to you. Your thoughts on ma'am's presentation and today's discussions.
Thank you, Ananya. Sujata, it was beyond brilliant. I think it is one of the most interesting sessions that we've had because it has just covered a topic on which there is fundamentally very little research and also very little is written on it, and it doesn't inform policy as such. But taking cue from your presentation, I think we can imbibe a lot of what you presented as part of policy. Having said that, I would say that I don't have the liberty and latitude of being a professor. And, being in that profession, it comes with a certain kind of liberty. As a practitioner, as a policy maker, we are hemmed in and constrained by very many, factors. We have to look at water not just from the perspective of its celestial, its ethereal, its cosmic quality, but we also have to also look it as as a facilitator of economic growth and development. So often for policy practitioners and for all of us, we are sometimes faced with dilemma of growth versus ecology.
Yes.
And I think what we do as policymakers is we always trade off. So, I don't have the privilege of saying, stop all adverse use of water, like stop building dams or stop having irrigation pipes or stop bringing water to the taps and go to the wells, because we also have development to consider. So, we cannot have an activist kind of approach. And therefore, it is very essential for us to listen to professionals, to academics, and to imbibe what is best in their perspective, but also somewhere to trade off, because you see, as Sujata has also mentioned, it's difficult to go back to the old times. We need water for our industries. We need water for our domestic water supply. We need water for our homes. We need water for agriculture, which may not be the best way in which water is being used. But still, this trade off, we have to do that. And I fully acknowledge that this is the kind of attitude we have towards anything. But yes, I totally agree with Sujata that, reverence and respect. Now we have this 5R concept in National Water Mission. It starts with respect. Honorable PM gave us this 4 mantras: reuse, reduce, recharge, and recycle, which Sujata has already talked about. But we've got in NWM, we have included respect as the 5th mantra for water. And as far as to the question of whether it is included in schools, I am happy to report that we have taken water as a topic in the with the Ministry of School Education, and there has been a lot of inclusion of water in grade 5, in grade 8, 10. So NCRT books have been revised, and a lot of inclusion has happened. Ministry of Education has been, in fact, a very great partner. They have also, like Sujata was saying, they have circulated Assam's concept of Jal Doot, where school children are water champions, to for pan-India implementation, and they've asked all states to follow or to make similar programs like the Jal Doot program of the government of Assam. Plus, under the National Water Mission, children are a very important category for us. We have MOUs with, NGOs which work on children. We organize workshops. And I generally, when I go to attend these kiddie workshops, I'm amazed at their knowledge. And we learn so much from them. And what Sujata was saying with regard to disrespecting water, I completely agree. The example you gave of Punjab was, to me, counterintuitive, Sujata, because to me, Punjab is a glaring example of how overuse of groundwater, over extraction of groundwater has led to a lot of water issues. Punjab, jisko, in movies and Bollywood, we used to see Lehl Raha Tha Khet and all, has the maximum number of dark zones today. And it has so many districts which are facing water scarcity, water salinity, because we although I would also say, as Sujata has mentioned, that it gave us the green revolution. Food security is equally important. As I said, it's a trade-off between, competing sectors. So it gave us the food security, it gave us the green revolution, but now it is facing the challenges of over-extraction of groundwater. So I would say that, yes, that is why under the mission, we are always advocating sustainable use of water, and starting from childhood. I would say that I used to always keep the tap open and brush, and it was my daughter who had studied in school who said that, Mom, don't waste electricity and water. So it should, Sujata, I agree, it should start from there. And we are making efforts to ensure that, it is embedded in curriculums. And water is not just considered, as you said, a molecule of hydrogen and oxygen, but something which is to be revered. There were a few questions in which, Ananya, you wanted my response. I was a little busy.
Yeah,
What
one
was
of
it with
them,
regard to? Yes, rituals. One was
yes,
rituals.
yeah.
So Sujata, I think, has already clarified that, government policy and government enforcement has certain limitations. Like you, faith is so personal to a human being that if you say, "Ki stop doing puja and stop polluting the rivers." So yes, we have to be mindful. We have to use biodegradable offerings, and these harsh oil and soaps are really polluting the river. And so while we have to be the government has a role in responsible waste disposal. Public also has a role in responsible offerings and rituals. And I remember seeing somewhere that all these flowers that, are offered, somebody is turning them into something in Varanasi or some
In
such. So,
agarbatti, incense stick. Yeah.
into incense sticks. So we also need to have, that was a very interesting question. We need to develop alternatives for these kind of offerings. Plus, we need to switch to biodegradable offerings, as a mark of respect. Was there anything else, Ananya?
There's one more question, if we have the time, from Rakesh
No, no,
Kumar
there
Mishra.
was something on which you wanted my response. There
It was
was
a
a
question
question.
by Vishrut, I think, about maintaining a balance between technology. What was your question, Vishrut? You had
I
asked a
think
question.
Okay, I was thoda sa, busy with office work, so I
No
was
problem.
not listening
Yeah, Vishrut, can you
sometime.
repeat your question?
So it was like water hyacinths are being converted into the products. So how does this idea of technology can be spread across the borders of our national water security, that uh, the
Okay,
things that
okay,
are
I get it. So under the National Water Mission, these kind of experiments which are happening, not only various in Assam, as she said, it's being marketed. Even in other states, they are being made into ropes and even biodegradable solutions, which are nature-based solutions, are being promoted. So we are doing all that and trying and we are sharing best practices with the districts, with especially we are going ahead and promoting nature based solutions as much as possible, in situ solutions. But at the same time, not everything can be nature based. We have to have a trade off. We have to see that development is not hindered, irrigation gets water, drinking water is there, because be it as it may, whatever Sujata says, sapiens, rule the planet, which I don't know whether we should or not. But yes, as far as practicable, we should try and save the planet. But at the same time, there are some modern conveniences which we have to, as especially as practitioners, it's always a trade-off for us. It can never be just a tunnel perspective that do this and don't do that. That should have sent me to academics or an activist, but I'm in government, so I always propagate a balanced view. And of
yeah.
course, as our Honorable Prime Minister always says, that, water has to be linked to community. He says that, Jal Andolan can only happen if there is Jan Andolan. So Sujata's whole, perspective, if it is converted to actual community participation, which we are really trying under, trying to reach out to the youth, you all, through all our water talks, DM dialogues, IC measures,
Yeah.
social media presence, is that, to basically take forward Honorable PM's view of Jan Bhagidari
Yeah.
in water. because that is the road ahead for us, and that is why especially we need you youth as as our ambassadors of water. Without you, without the children, there is a limit to how much the government can do, and that is why Honorable Prime Minister always says that in water or in all the social sector programs, it has to be a whole of government, whole of society approach for us to go forward, develop, but also sustain the ecology. Mission Life is a shining example of his vision, where he seeks, curbing on unbridled consumption, and says that there should be balance where ecology is also honored, development is also honored, and the last mile and equity is also honored. So I hope I've answered all the questions, Ananya. I have a meeting, so I think we can wind up with your summing up comments, or
Yes.
and
Thank you
thanking
so much.
Sujata and
Thank
all the
you.
students again.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Archana ma'am. Thank you, Sujata ma'am, and thanks to all the students for joining us today. And thank you to our wonderful audience. Thank you, Sujata ma'am, once again for bringing in a very unique and interesting perspective about water and water security. And as Archana ma'am said, that a balance has to be struck between conserving water and developmental initiatives. So yes, I hope that is the way we can go ahead with. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and we will meet again for the 63rd edition of the Water Talk series. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, Archana, and to you, Ananya, and to, of course, National Water Mission, and of course to my students who have got an exposure to how the government works, because there's always a gap between the theory and the practice. As Archana was, we are in the academic realm talking ideal, but yeah, now they understand the nuances as to how much and what can be actually achieved. Yes, thank you
Definitely.
so much for
Yes.
giving us this opportunity. Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Thank you.